He train car filled with a sound like a panic bell. People were shouting, shoes slapped on the floor, and someone screamed for help. In a single car between towns, a man with a knife ran down the aisle. He moved fast and people fell back, clutching each other. Blood marked the seat where a woman had been sitting a minute before. Someone tried to stop him and was pushed aside. The attacker kept going, breathing hard, eyes wild. In only a few minutes, many people were hurt. The car became a place of fear and noise. Outside, the train sped on toward London. Inside, no one felt safe. The headlines would later call it a mass stabbing on a UK train, a day Britain would not forget. But in that moment, the passengers only wanted to know one small thing. How do we get out alive? Then, just as someone in the carriage lunged forward, a strong voice boomed through the train. Everyone stay down. Stay down and stay quiet. It came from a man standing up from between the seats. He had a badge on his jacket, not a police badge, a small security patch. He moved slowly and kept his hand in the air, palms open, counting on his fingers. People looked at him like a lifeline. He stepped forward to block the attacker, and for a second the whole car held its breath. The attacker turned, knife raised. The bright lights of station lamps flashed through the windows as the train passed, painting faces in white. Then, before anyone could see how it would end, the doors opened at the next station, and a small group of officers in yellow jackets piled onto the platform with radios blaring. The screen cut to black on the moment one officer shouted, "Get down!" And the chapter stops there, leaving the question burning. Would the officers reach the carriage in time? Earlier that morning, the day had been ordinary. Commuters stretched their legs and sipped coffee. A school bus rolled by the station. Sarah, a young teacher from Boston who had moved to the UK for a year, held her rucksack on the seat. She thought about lesson plans and the sandwich in her bag. Marcus, an office worker from Chicago on a short work trip, checked his watch and listened for the announcement. Old Mr. Taylor from Ohio, who liked to sit by the window, had a small paperback book folded at chapter 30. They all did the small, simple things people do before travel. Read, check phone, pull out headphones, look at the rain outside. No one expected that a stranger with anger in his hands would change their day. The train car itself was bright and clean. A map with bright lines showed stops ahead. The public address system spoke in calm tones. People stood, people sat, people typed, people stared. A mother from California held her little boy's hand and handed him a biscuit. Two students from New Jersey argued quietly about exams. A man with a police-looking coat, his name was Officer James on his jacket, took a seat and smiled at the small, sleepy world around him. None of them saw the first small sign. The attacker had sat just 3 rows up for part of the trip. He had been quiet, eyes on his phone. He had ordered 2 coffees and left one untouched. He had whispered to no one. Then he had stood suddenly, clutched something hidden in his jacket, and walked the aisle. No alarms, no warning, just the suddenness of it. How someone could become dangerous so quickly is a jolt people don't like to think about. On trains, you expect cows of ordinary routine, a newspaper rustling, someone rubbing their eyes, a baby crying down the carriage. The attacker moved through that ordinary like a shadow. When he reached the middle of the car, he turned and struck. A mother shoved her child under a seat. A man whose name was Tom from Seattle grabbed a magazine and held it up like a shield. The attacker pushed past them and slashed at a young woman who got up to help. She fell and a sharp howl came from her throat. People ran toward each other then away. Confusion rippled like water. In the control room above, the signal operator watched several screens. He pinched his temple with his thumb because the morning news was running late and he was tired. He saw the car shake on camera 3 and heard the radio chirp. The operator called the driver. The driver's face went white. On the platform, staff felt the tremor of the car and looked up from the timetable. They heard the shout on the train speakers. The driver slammed the brakes and radioed for help. The train slowed and then stopped at the next station, a small platform with a coffee kiosk and a timetable board blinking in the rain. People on the platform looked up as the doors opened. Outside, the police started to run. A pair of uniformed officers in bright yellow vests had been placing cones on the platform. They heard the calls over their radios and sprinted. A station cleaner dropped a rag, then picked it up, then slipped into the doorway to help calm people. The world outside the carriage was wet and gray, with the sky like a thick blanket. Rain had left the ground shiny and reflective, and the lights along the platform made puddles glow like tiny stars. The officers reached the platform and saw the doors swinging. They could hear something shouting and a desperate banging. They drew their radios close and shouted instructions. In those first minutes after an attack, people do small things that feel huge. Sarah, the teacher, crawled across a seat and helped the injured woman sit up. She pressed a small handkerchief against the wound, not knowing if it would help, but trying anyway. Marcus held his tie between his teeth, hands shaking, and held the little boy so he would not see. Old Mr. Taylor mouthed a prayer. Half of the passengers were Americans, and they did what they felt they could do. Small bravery became the only defense some people had. On the platform, a paramedic arrived with bright orange across his chest. He called out for stretchers. A police sergeant yelled for the attacker to drop the weapon. Sirens began to sound in the distance. The train doors remained open. The man with a knife, now at the end of the carriage, turned and saw the police. Their flashlights made his pupils small. Anger tightened his jaw. He swung. A bright flash of metal cut the air. Someone screamed. At home that night. People would ask why such things happen. Reporters would try to explain who the man was, his past, whether he was alone, whether he had planned it. But at the station, there was only the immediate rush. Riders left the train because officers told them to move to platform quickly. A policeman, Officer Adams, a solid man from New Jersey who had been working security in London for months, aimed his baton but kept his distance. He did not want to hurt anyone more than necessary. "Drop the knife," the sergeant shouted. The man did not drop the knife. He took another step, and the sergeant fired a taser at close range. Electricity cracked, and the man collapsed in a heap, free hand splayed, chest heaving. The taser had worked enough to make him drop the weapon. The officers moved in and cuffed him, but the work did not stop there. There were injured to help, cries to quiet, breaths to count. The paramedic checked pulses, and then shouted for blankets. Sarah wrapped the injured woman in a blanket and hummed softly because the sound of humming makes fear a little less loud. Marcus found his phone and started filming, not to hurt anyone but to show his mother he was okay. Mr. Taylor closed his paperback and tucked it under his arm like a much-loved talisman. Even before the suspect was led away, the train company's text system pinged warnings to thousands of commuters. Service delayed. Seek alternative travel. Lines went crazy with messages. Friends called friends. The news vans arrived. Reporters took equipment out of trucks and set up tripods on the wet pavement. Nearby, a man from Texas who played the guitar on trains began to sing quietly with his head in his hands, a way of making sound rise above panic. When the full story reached the cameras, this is what people heard. 11 people injured, 3 seriously. The attacker arrested at the scene. A quick response that saved lives. Witnesses who stepped forward to help. The government officials said they would look into how someone could bring a weapon on a train and how to prevent it in the future. A big question echoed. Could more have been done to stop it before it started? People debated about knives, screening more police. Others said the focus should be on mental health and support for people in crisis. The lines of talk stretched long and loud. Back at the station, investigators took photos and notes. They collected the knife in a plastic bag, marked the spot where the attacker had stood and where people had fallen. Forensics took fingerprints. A detective in a Navy jacket from California took statements from passengers and wrote down names. He talked to Sarah and Marcus and Mr. Taylor. "You were brave," he said to each. They shook their heads like they had not been brave at all. Just ordinary people who had done what they could. They answered questions. Where did you sit? What did you see? Did you hear anything before? Answers came slow at first and then faster. In the days after, many small stories would ripple from that carriage. A woman named Emily from Florida would be praised for pulling a sleeve over a bleeding wound. A teenager, Noah from Georgia, would get a medal for flagging down an officer and pointing to the attacker. The security man who had stood up in the car would talk about his fear and his fast reflexes. He would say later that he only did what his training had taught him. Keep calm, keep others calm, and block the path. The attacker would be questioned in a small interview room with a kettle on the table. He would say things that made little sense and other things that did. Investigators would try to learn if he had planned the event or acted alone. Medical teams would step in, and lawyers too. The public would argue over how to keep trains safe. In small towns far from the city, people would hold their hands a little tighter on buses and trains. Children would ask their parents about safety. But the memory of that day, the fear and the bravery, would not leave quickly. The woman with the wound would heal, but sometimes the sound of a train closing doors would make her stomach drop. The young boy would ask his mother why people were angry. Sarah would sometimes wake and think she could still hear the bells. Marcus would keep checking train timetables. And Mr. Taylor would bring his book, when he rode again, to show himself that small routines could come back. And the station? It would clean the blood off the floor. It would fix the windows shattered during the panic. The timetable board would blink and return to life. The cameras would keep rolling. The officers would get new training, and the company would review policies. The news would move on to the next story, and people would say that the world had kept going. But for those who were there, the memory would be an unclosed thread. The chapter ends with officers cuffing the attacker and lifting him away. With the train now quiet in a strange way, all the noise gone, and only small sounds like shoes and a distant bell left. In the crowd, the security man who had first stood up sat with his head in his hands and whispered, "I still hear him." Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin light broke through clouds and dusted the platform. People moved, some slowly, some hurried, but all of them carried the morning in their pockets. This was the first chapter. The questions remained. Who was the attacker for real? Was he alone? What did investigators find in his phone and his home? Did this change the rules on trains? The answers were still coming. For now, passengers clutched blankets in each other and hoped the world would be a little safer next ride.